Welcome to We Question and Learn. Tom Pies. Two special guests. Dr. Joyce Miller is with us today, and Elana Como. Did I say that right? Doctor? No, we're talking about education today. And Dr. Joyce Miller, your official title, please, for this program.
I am the Chief Executive Officer of the Northwest Institute of Research.
And we were teasing a little as we sat down in the studio because it seems like every one of you, both of you rather, have 2 or 3 titles and outstanding outcomes and positions. So that's your official title for this program.
Yes, for this program.
Okay. And Elana, your title for this program is?
The Director of Early Learning Resource Center Region 1. Also, the Quality Initiatives Director for Early Learning Resource Center Region 2.
All right, so people know how all this works. The organization that sets this up is your organization.
Yeah,
how did this come to be? How does this work?
Well, the Northwest Institute of Research is the lead organization that holds the contract with the state of Pennsylvania to manage the Early Learning Resource Center.
Those are 2 big things. Now, there's a contract with the state because there's a reason the state has this set up, right?
Yes, and in fact, the reason it has it set up is that at the federal level, the Child Care Development Fund, which is federal dollars that are allocated to every state, provides funding for helping families find child care. So it provides subsidies for low-income families so that they can afford child care and go to work. The other part of the Child Care Development Fund, it provides dollars to every state to improve the quality of early care and education for those children and to improve their outcomes.
How long has this been going on? Is this last few years, last decade, last 20 years?
The transition to the Early Learning Resource Center is brand new.
Brand
so
new, okay.
It's July 1 of 2018.
Brand
but the
new.
Child Care Development Block Fund funding has been around since the 90s.
So we have 2 programs, one new, one, but you're solving the same problem, hopefully, right?
We're integrating 2 sources of funding into one in the hopes that we're reducing some of the administrative burden and we're housing all of those services under one roof now.
How did you set up your organization to solve this problem? Is it something you did a while ago? Is it just something that you folks saw there was a need to take care of in our community?
The Northwest Institute of Research for the last 12 years was already functioning on the side of improving the quality of early care and education. And so we have that experience with respect to working with child care providers and other early learning resource centers to help them improve their quality. So that responsibility and function we had been doing for several years. When the state decided to, again, combine both the quality services for child care providers with the family services that help families find quality care and afford it. Yeah. When those were combined, those became the new Early Learning Resource Center. And basically, we applied for the contract and were awarded the contract.
Okay, that was the question. And you're a nonprofit.
Yes.
You're 501c3, whatever you're designated.
Correct,
and
yes.
you work hand to mouth, just like any other nonprofit. So what motivated you folks to do this? What was the need at the time? Or there was just the need and your organization was positioned to do this?
I think historically, this goes back to my other organization, which is a Keystone Research Corporation, but since the late 80s when the state initially got into this arena of improving the quality of care and providing training for child care providers, my other organization had the statewide contract to provide professional development. And so things have just evolved over the years.
On a daily basis, Elana, what are your tasks? What are your charges? What do you have to accomplish?
Passion to help the provider and the family community. So every day since we opened on July 1 and prior to as the regional key, which we were in the past, providers and families have a lot of needs with their children and just trying to help them, whether it's mentoring their teachers or with families, helping them find the resources that they need for their children, whether that's connecting them to early intervention services because their child some really unique or challenging needs. It's a different challenge every day based on the unique needs
Anybody
of the
who
family.
has children know, but
Yes.
you're helping the more stressed children, would you say, your organization? Subjectively,
I
or
would
all
say
children?
it's all children, but a lot of the funding is going to the most needy.
And then you determine that? How is that determined?
So there are eligibility requirements, which we follow from both the state and federal regulations.
Okay, so
So
that comes, the
the
government has
top,
established a
yes,
need, and you're
yes.
solving the problem.
Yes.
In Erie, Pennsylvania, in your opinion, or maybe you have hardcore data, what portion of our population is stressed? I've heard some
All of it.
outrageous numbers. Really? I know you're teasing a little, but
A little
the
bit.
system does need a little
Yes.
reworking, or let's just say it needs some improvement, right? The children need this service?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
How big is it prevalent? Like half the families in, say,
So currently we're serving over 5,000 families.
and how do they become eligible through this government program? They become eligible for your work.
Yeah, so they have to go through some verifications
Oh,
to
wow.
determine their income eligibility and other priorities, such as are they a foster child? So thinking in terms of
How do they find you? I'm sure there's folks that don't know about this.
not yet. Hopefully,
You're working on it.
yes.
Yeah, so this is
hopefully,
what
with,
your campaign
with
is for.
all the branding that we're doing, hopefully they know we're a one-stop shop for all families that are looking for services for their children, as well as a one-stop shop for the early learning community for professional development, training,
Does
technical
this come as a
assistance.
grant, or is it a rolling budget? It comes as a grant?
It does
It's
come
grant,
as a grant.
yes.
And obviously you have to go through that process, so folks understand applying for grants is just not a single piece of paper.
Oh, no.
No, it's a rigorous year-long.
I've seen grants
Year-long
that are-
You don't know what
adventure.
we went through. You don't want to know what we went through last year applying for this grant.
But the compliment is that you did it, and I've seen grants that go 1,000 pages. That's not funny. But what provoked you to do this? I know you realize there's a need in the community, but it takes energy and personal sacrifice, right? What provoked you to do this? Either of you or both
Well,
of you?
again, I think historically, at least myself, I've been involved in working with the state of Pennsylvania since the late 80s
Wow, right.
in this area of early care and education.
Yeah.
And, to some extent, I'm a business, so it was a line of business that I tapped into. Although I have to say that I do have a definite passion for helping young children succeed. And I am totally committed to the idea that, especially at-risk children, need to have access to high-quality early care and education because it is going to substantially improve their chances to be ready for school and to be successful in school. And again, there's a lot of research that documents that. And that's one of the reasons why the federal government, too, has put so much behind early care and education and the quality improvements because they do recognize the importance of enabling those families that might not be able to afford, high quality care to have access to it. And again, I guess I'm committed to it just because I think it's really important, and that's probably one of my values.
It's your mission in life to help
Yes,
children.
yes.
And same with you,
And
Elana.
same,
Yeah.
the 0 to 5 is critical for brain development. It's a critical stage.
How do you integrate with the schools then? Or is this preschool?
It's preschool.
So the schools are already receiving these children with their stress points, right? And you're preschool.
We're preschool. But many of the early learning facilities are operating in our school districts now. It's diversified based on the need of the family. So
Okay.
some family, thinking in terms of working families who are trying to get themselves out of different circumstances, and we all need a job, and we know jobs aren't 9 to 5 these days. So depending on if it's those non-traditional evening hours, weekend hours, we partner with all early learning learning providers, whether it's a relative provider because they're caring for that child in the evening and the weekend, or if it's a school district that is offering a 3-year-old program, 4-year-old program, Head Start, early intervention, child care, group daycare, certified family daycare. So depending...
It's overwhelming to me because
It's
it seems like you'd
huge.
have a syllabus this thick just with what you do
Yes.
and
Well,
what services you provide. It's like a big, long...
Keep in mind, we're not providing the child care services
Okay.
ourselves.
Yeah.
We work with those providers, and those
Right.
providers can be private, independent businesses, or they can be located
Okay.
in school districts, or they could be part of other community organizations that provide the actual child care. What our organization does and what the Early Learning Resource Center does is work with those providers to improve their quality.
Okay.
And then we work with the families who are searching out those child care providers and the kinds of financial subsidies that they have access to help pay for that care. But the payment for the care is actually going to the provider.
Okay. Yeah.
And
Not
so
the
we're not
families.
actually setting up the child care provider
Right.
network or system. They already exist. However, we provide resources that help them with respect to improving their quality, helping them to find qualified staff, and so forth.
Oh, so you're an expediter, basically. You're a company, not a company, but an organization.
Well, we're a resource center.
You make this work.
Yeah.
The obvious name, Early Learning Resource Center. Has this happened in other communities?
Oh, you want to give the history?
Yeah,
This
would
is-
you do
it's
that?
very interesting.
So the
That was-
history
yeah.
is it used to be county-based. So all of the organizations in the past that provided the family services were county-based. So across the state of Pennsylvania, once upon a time, there were 65 facilities that were providing the family services. And through the years, the state has integrated those services. They've joined them together. So we went from, prior to July 1, 47 organizations to now 22 regionally based early learning resource
All
centers.
over-
All over Pennsylvania.
So you have a big territory.
So there's actually
geez.
22
Yeah.
organizations managing something
program.
similar to what we're doing in Region 1 and supporting
How far do you
Region
go
2.
geographically?
Geographically, if you go to the east, we go as far out as Potter County.
Oh, wow.
So we go into
Yeah.
God's country.
You're out
You've
there.
been there, yes.
This is not easy all of a sudden.
No, and then as far south as we manage Mercer and Venango County as far south, and then over to
That's a good haul,
Clearfield
yeah.
County,
Yeah.
and the 14 counties in between.
Not fun
that's
in
what
winter,
we're
right?
supporting.
So both these programs manage parents, manage children, or at least manage the problem, try to overcome the problems under these two. Are they separate? They're just separate because one involves...
There are two different
chil-
functions
They're
that
two different-
operate under the Early Learning Resource Center.
Okay.
Again, one of them focusing primarily on the needs of families and working with them. The other function working primarily with the child care provider community and giving them the kinds of resources they need to improve their quality. You know, I would like to add, in
please
terms
do.
of a historic...
You just provoked a critical question.
well,
Please,
I just want to add to the historical
Yes,
context
please.
of this whole, what I'm going to call a national effort to improve the quality of early care and education and to support families with respect to that. And it goes back to the 80s in the United States when that Child Care Development Fund was initially established. So at the federal level, they recognized that need, and every state then, particularly with respect to the quality side and improving the quality of early care and education, every state then gradually over, I'd say the next decade or 10 to 15 years, established their quality programming for early care and education, prior to that, the subsidized child care system had been in place. But the recognition that you needed to improve quality in order to improve the outcomes for children was recognized. And over the years, even where other federal budgets have, been on the decline, we have seen that there has at least been steady support or increasing support for allocating dollars for early care and education.
You'd think it
And
would be
so it's been
obvious.
it's been recognized. And again, there's a lot of research that substantiates it. We still don't feel that it's at the level that it should be because, just coming over here, Elana was saying, we still have 500 children that are on the waiting list in Erie, in our region, yes.
To come into your program?
To
We're not
be
able
able
to serve
You
right
can't
now.
get there yet.
They
Not
cannot-
that you can't.
They can't get the subsidy
They can't
to
get the
help.
subsidy.
So if they can't get a subsidy for childcare, then they can't go to work. So there's still a need for that, and of course, the other critical need with respect to the early care and education, provider community, is that the wage rate for the workers in that, I'm going to call it the industry,
Yeah.
is at the bottom of the.
Well, you just took my question away, and I'm glad you did because face front, it's daycare providers, preschool maybe. There's some nice franchises out there that have pretty buildings, and we congratulate them on being successful, but it's an indication the need is huge.
Oh, well, yes. And again, one of the issues, though, is that even though, like, the services and supports we provide for providers, especially in the educational area, is you can train them and they receive their credentials, whether it's, a child development associate credential or whether it's a bachelor's degree, but you get them trained and educated and support that. But then if they get that and work for a little while, then they move into the school districts because
They're
wages.
so well trained.
The wages are higher there, and again, it's a critical problem because keep in mind that child care providers are, for the most part, private companies. And they are not earning enough money to pay the wages
Or they're
that are
private single-person entities on it.
Yes, right. They could be home-based providers.
Yeah.
Yes, and
they don't have resources.
Yeah,
They
so-
don't even have space sometimes. They have multiple children in a small area, a home area.
so that whole wage issue is another thing that's coming on the horizon now. That and keep in mind that unless you're really low income, then you can tap into some subsidy. But other than that, it's a parent's own responsibility to find childcare and to pay for it. And
Plus, they're just struggling to find a job sometimes.
Yes.
They need
Yes.
skill sets to find jobs.
Yeah.
So it's a loop from
Yes,
child to
yes,
adult. So you're in the right place.
Well, one of the things we always
in the
say,
right
though,
place.
is this should be a three-legged stool here. That if you look at the critical need for supporting a system in our country, and I'm not just talking about Erie, Pennsylvania now, but in our country, providing quality care for young children so that it helps families, and especially today when we know that it's pretty typical that you have two wage earner families. You really need to set up a system in our country that supports those families for early care and education. And it should involve, some responsibility on the part of the parent or guardian, of the government, but also business and industry. And business and industry is the third leg of that stool that hasn't stepped forward to provide.
I think they're realizing that if we don't have a resource for employees, trained employees, or at least skilled employees, it's not like in the 20s where you went to work in a steel mill for 40 years and had a good pension. Now you have to have huge skill sets to work in a metal working.
Well, we're still waiting for them to knock down our door to help support the system. They haven't done that yet, have they?
It's your chance to campaign. And
any of your
vote.
listeners out there that are in
let's-
business and industry, we more than welcome any kind of.
Well, let's sneak in how to find you because This is a critical issue, two critical issues. If someone wanted to learn more, and they're in business and industry, how would they find you both? What's the best way to talk to you about this? They're debating what phone number to give out.
Oh, no. Yeah.
Is there a website?
Do you know the phone number?
It's so new.
You have to understand, yes. Give us the brochure.
It's on the brochure.
I don't know that it's on there.
Yeah. No, really. Is there? How do people? What if they wanted to talk to you in the next week or two, and they wanted to say, "Hey, geez, maybe I can talk to you about the problem, or maybe you can call them, or they're interested, or maybe you can send them a brochure." Is there a place they could either drop you a note or an email they could touch base, if that's okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Our website is www.nwirelrc.org, and all of the contact information is there. nwirelrc.org. And there's numerous people there that be willing to
And they can
talk
boot that up
with
on their
anyone.
phone or online, and they can get a synopsis of all the things that you're talking about today.
Yes.
So you just started in July.
We just started.
But I don't believe you just planned July 2nd what you were going to do for the rest of the year. What did it take to get this organized? Because you applied for a grant, so this must have been going on for months, if not years before.
It's been on a work in progress
Right
since
along.
June of 2017,
A
and
whole year.
transition activities began in April, and we opened our doors on July 1st.
So you're in educate the community mode.
Yes, we are.
And-
Community outreach, so they know where
And
we
not
are.
only the families, but the community leaders, as you say, the
Yes.
manufacturers, the educators. How are the universities and the schools looking at this? Are they just learning about it as well? Is this something new
We do have a
to them?
regional leadership council,
Okay.
and the regional leadership council does have members from all areas of the community. So whether it's arts and culture,
Is that your board then?
well, not our
No,
board.
not your board, but
the
that's
board
your
would be
community
separate.
access,
That would
right?
be kind of our community outreach.
How many people show up for this?
So historically, we
Yeah.
had close to 75 people on our leadership council.
That many.
That was when we had
they all found
19
that,
counties.
Yeah, and they found that critical,
Yes,
obviously. Okay,
yes.
so
And
that's not a
currently,
small group.
we're taking applications
Okay.
currently, and we have 45
Go down to the
individuals.
website or go online.
Go to the website, contact me,
Yeah.
and I can get you a leadership council
I have a feeling there's going to be more
application,
people enthused with this than you
I'm-
imagine.
Well, my email was blowing up this week,
Was it
so
really
I'm
already?
super excited to see the interest.
That's
in,
encouraging in one way because that means people realize part of fundraising and education is making people understand there is a problem. They gloss over what's really the cause of what's going on in our society, right? Like Joyce, you were saying, it's an emotional issue for you.
Yes.
You know, your whole organization is an emotional issue and obviously for you. I can tell by the look on your face. So, you wouldn't spend this time doing this.
No.
Unless has any other organization decided or thought about helping you?
Oh, we have many partners. So
Okay.
not only locally, but across the state,
whole
we have
state.
a lot of
The whole state.
partners.
And the
we
government
help
thinks
our
this is
partners as
important. Obviously, the federal government thinks it's important.
Yeah, and it's nice that it's bipartisan. So no matter who's in office,
Interesting, yeah.
the need has really focusing on it's important to support working families, but with all the brain research, people have finally recognized how critical 0 to 5 is. So no matter who has been in office, they recognize this is a critical need to continue.
Obviously, the schools think
funding
this is
and
great.
increasing funding.
Yeah,
So
the
it's
schools
been-
think this is great because they get prepped students,
Yes.
children,
Yes.
families. They get to go to work. Too bad we couldn't just give them a subsidy to stay home, but that doesn't solve the education problem. Am I right? I mean, the issues of the content. What are these kids learning between 0 and 5? Unfortunately, we have this little box in the corner of the room that, well, PBS is okay. Because they do a lot of outreach and good work. But there's a lot of other channels on a 100-channel digital box that's sort of scary to me, you know, and I'm sure to you as well.
Yes.
So you're overcoming obstacles as well, I think, right?
Yeah.
Starting from scratch.
Hopefully exposing to the positive in a quality early learning setting, too. I think that
Okay.
little box in the corner
I'm
isn't
gonna
always
tell you
Isn't
that-
on.
isn't always positive when it
Yeah,
is.
Turn it off for a week, you know,
Yes.
except for PBS.
Yes.
But so folks, if they go to the website, they're able to gain enough information to be able to contact you, maybe participate, and any last thoughts before we run out of time? I know you both are enthused over this. This is a big deal.
Oh, it's a very big deal.
What's a budget? Is it fair to say how much is the state allocated for something like this, or is that number not?
Well, across the
Well,
whole state.
Yeah.
Well, I
across
was
the
going to say, even across the nation,
Yeah.
it's $6 billion.
Wonderful.
But
I
to
guess maybe
fully fund our nation,
Yeah.
it would be closer to $200 billion.
$200 billion.
$200 billion if
I
we
want
were
people to hear that number because that's the critical issue.
Yeah, it's an underfunded nationwide problem
And
right
Pennsylvania
now.
again was
And Pennsylvania's waiting list to support families is 10,000.
10,000 families.
10,000
That's what you know
families.
about.
Yes.
There's obviously
correct.
many more,
Right.
10,000 families. And the budget for Pennsylvania, hard to tell.
Close to $1 billion.
Okay,
It's
that's a
about
start.
800 million. And that's for all early learning services.
That's the first year budget for what you do? Or
Oh,
that-
no, that's
been the budget
statewide.
right along.
That's statewide budget.
Okay.
Do you want our budget? You can give our
Well,
budget.
you don't
if
have to
want.
mention that, but I was going to say
Okay.
it's time for a letter writing campaign because the issue are those little kids you see playing in the playground with no place to go, and
Right.
babysitters, some daycare that needs augmenting to a great degree.
Well, again, that's our statewide budget, but the fact is that there's still 10,000 families that do not have access to a subsidy to help them pay for childcare and go to work. And there are childcare providers that are still making minimum wage and even those with bachelor's degrees, if they're making
$9 an hour.
$9
is the
an
average.
hour.
And they
I mean, that's
expect-
just not.
And they are expecting our children to get class 5-star care for minimum wage. That
Yes.
doesn't seem right.
No, it does not seem right. There's still a critical need in the early care and education industry.
And we haven't even touched on the health issues that sometimes get involved in this. Children are not well. They
Well,
can't
one of the
learn.
things that,
They're not fed
the
properly.
Resource Center does, though, is help families if they do have needs for any other kinds of services, then we help direct them to those services. And we also, again, closely work with the early intervention system, which provides specialized services for children with special needs. And then there's a special training in that, and mentoring of child care providers to help children that have socio-emotional, needs. So a lot of those kinds of what might be more health-related needs are being addressed by the services that we provide. But again, we're connecting with the entities in the network that already have that expertise to provide the services. So we're just helping, facilitate
And move it forward.
that.
The bad part of my job is to say we're out of time.
Oh.
NWIRELRC.org will answer all the questions that I may have failed to ask. Elana Como, Dr. Joyce Miller, thank you so much for being here. This is great.
Thank you.
Thank
It's
you,
a real
Tom.
education for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
On NPR News, it's all about the story.
People can surprise you anytime.
The people behind movies, books, and music.
Music is like a Rorschach test, and people hear what they want to hear.
I'm Arun Roth, the new host of All Things Considered from NPR News, now coming to you every weekend from NPR West in Southern California.
Sunday afternoon at 5 on WQLN Radio. Hi, this is Jeff Hanley, host of Jazz Happening Now. Each week we listen to some of the latest jazz recordings, and I think you'll be thrilled by what today's jazz musicians are doing and saying. The recording industry has changed, but the music is as alive and as vibrant as ever. The future of jazz is happening right now if you just listen. And please do.
Sunday night at 6 on WQLN Radio.
Welcome to We Question and Learn. This is Tom Pies. Real pleasure today to have Donald W. Moore. Are you the executive director, the chief bottle washer? You're the guy who owns everything. What's your official title? I was looking online, and you seem to have a lot of responsibility and no official designation. Am I?
We don't use titles at Decision Associates.
I thought that was the case.
Yeah. So my wife and I are owners of the business, and we founded it in 1984. And I'm just not a title person. So all of us at Decision Associates are executive consultants, and I let it go at that.
I was looking forward
It's
to
what I
having
do.
you.
It's what I like to do. You know,
Well, it's
consulting.
It's a good attitude. Yeah, and it keeps you on an even keel with your clients. I'm sure.
It does. I had a real job once, actually.
You did.
When you've been doing this for a long time, people think that the only thing you've ever done is consulting. But I actually I worked for a company that people don't know anymore, but it was owned by the Freiling brothers. And I don't know if you know this, but the Freilings brought the first plastic injection molding machine to Erie, Pennsylvania. I believe in the 1920s. They bought it from Germany and brought it here, and so the birth of the plastics industry in the United States is easily attributed to the Freilings. And when you think about what the plastics industry has done for the United States and what it's done for this region, I mean, that's fascinating. But the Freilings were serial entrepreneurs, and so after probably around the late 50s, they got interested in electronics. Now, remember, at that time, they not only owned plastic injection molding companies, but injection molding is a machining-intensive industry. Those tools are very complex, and then all the components to support an injection molding machine are very complex. So they owned machining companies and tool companies, and they decided to get into the electronics field. So Erie Technological Products, which, the remnants of that, there are some pieces of that are still here today, but they owned Erie Technological Products, which is one of the leading electronics companies in the United States, particularly providing military electronics, components for military electronics. Most of those were spin-offs from the work that the Freilings did.
Yes.
Because what would happen is somebody would be working for a tool shop or a machine shop and feel like, I could do this and I could make money, and they would buy a machine and put it in their garage.
That's right.
And then they'd have a customer, and then 2 or 3 customers, and then 4 or 5 customers, and then they would move to a bigger garage, and then maybe rent a building. And my point is, Erie is an entrepreneurial community, and it's been an entrepreneurial community since the early 1800s. And there's been waves of that entrepreneurism. The core focus of our business is absolutely entrepreneurial companies. 80% of the work we do is industrial. We work for industrial and commercial companies as consultants, and 20%, 25%, depending on the year, is in nonprofits. And on the industrial and commercial side, 100% of our clients are entrepreneurial businesses.
I wanted you to come here today because the one thing I was going to ask you is Erie is still a wonderful manufacturing opportunity. Right? Am I
no,
close?
if you look at the statistics, statistics still show that Erie's gross product has a higher percent of manufacturing than most cities and most regions. I should say Northwest Pennsylvania has a higher percentage of its gross product coming out of manufacturing than most regions of the country.
And that's your core. 80% of your business centers in on manufacturing.
Intentionally so.
And
yes.
This is why I'm excited that you're here. You said a great word, entrepreneurialism, being an entrepreneur. So that's still important today here?
It's very important, and
forgive me, prevalent.
It's prevalent. It's almost a drive. It seems that it's almost a drive in this region in Northwest Pennsylvania, because we do need to step beyond Erie. Northwest Pennsylvania is very entrepreneurial. It's as though there's something in the water. It seems that there's this high percentage of people that just feel driven in the way that they feel driven to eat and breathe and drink, to have independence. And even a lot of people who, if you were to go into a company and walk around and just ask people, what do you do in your spare time, you'd be astonished at the number of people who have a job and then they have a side business. I ran into a guy whose side business was making bows, custom bows for archery hunters, and each bow was customized around the type of game the person was hunting. And I could go on and give you 40 stories like that.
I met that person. They were at the Gannon SBDC at one of the seminars with their product. It was incredible to see something so sportsmanlike, so to speak, as an entrepreneurial business in the 21st century. Right? Am I wrong?
Not at all. And that's a person who had a full-time job and was an entrepreneur on the side. So there's even more entrepreneurism than we realize.
To make. That was not a toy. I'm being somewhat facetious.
Well, but there you go. You're going to the heart of entrepreneurism.
Yeah.
People go into a business that they love, and there are people who love machining, and there are people who love being in the brewery business, and there are people who love being in the retail business. But you can't be an entrepreneur and do it in any other way except working on something that you absolutely love.
Your fields of expertise: general manufacturing, electronics, food processing, plastics, rubber, construction, tool and construction. That's a little different. Tool and die machining, which we mentioned, chemicals and plating, and of course then the governmental stuff and the nonprofit stuff. So you're at the core of what this community is all about. Now, what do you see happening? I mean, I try and survey our guests as to, are we going in the right direction? Are we moving forward? Is this a good area to be?
Well, the evidence would suggest it's a good area to be. I mean, if you look at even recent newspaper articles that in spite of some larger companies that are decreasing their presence in Erie, Pennsylvania, and that's something that's been going on for 15 years. If I went back for the last 15 years, I could pick a company a year that is a larger companies typically that are decreasing their dependence on the Erie region, and yet our unemployment. And if you think about, and I can mention GE because they've certainly mentioned themselves, but if you just look at the amount of displacement at GE, and yet our unemployment is around 4%, if I remember a recent article I read in the newspaper. So clearly, it's entrepreneurial companies, entrepreneurial people who've stepped into that void. And the number one refrain I hear from people in every one of those industries you named and a dozen more industries that you didn't name is, we can't get people. If I could get more people, I could increase my output by, pick a number, 5%, 10%. I mean, that's what we hear. So the evidence would say, back to evidence, whether it's unemployment, whether it's new business startups, whether it's the press to try to find more productivity because employees are hard to come by, the evidence is that Erie's a good place to be. Northwest Pennsylvania is a good place to be, and so that's not only anecdotal from our experience. I think the numbers bear it out.
How do the colleges and universities help you? Well, let me rephrase that. Are they a help? That's not a good question either. But how do they affect the arena that you deal in?
I think let me back up. I know that the colleges and universities in Northwest Pennsylvania have done a great job of keeping their finger on the pulse of the needs of regional employers. They know that a large percent of their students will leave and stay here, and so they look at the industries, they look at the needs. They're constantly talking with employers and constantly talking with regional organizations like the Manufacturers Association, for example, and there are others, to understand the needs, and they're building programs around them. So I think that, and I could talk for a long time about some of those programs, but I feel that they're being very, very responsive in every one of the institutions of higher learning in our region.
You moved completely to the other side of the country virtually at one time in your life. Am I right?
I did.
Yeah, you actually left. I mean, you really left.
Well, it was yeah, that's an
well, it's not like you went to Europe or anything, but it's just as far in the other direction.
Yeah. So, Erie Technological Products had an older product line that was mostly hand assembled, and they were electronic components, but mostly hand assembled. And the cost of that hand assembly and the availability of people who could do it was, the cost was going up, and the availability of people who could do it was declining. So I was the plant manager of that division, and the majority of our best employees were older women, and they had great dexterity, because at that time women grew up doing a lot of sewing and other fine work, and so it was a matter of the people who did the best at it and the people who took the job and stayed at it. Yeah. But it was getting, they were aging, and that workforce was aging. It was hard to find newer people. The costs were going up, so they decided to move it to Mexico.
Oh, to Mexico. Okay.
So they moved my plant to Mexico, and they built a management facility and warehouse in Tucson. And I went out there for a few months to help them get it started, but ultimately wanted to be back here. My family roots are all here, so it was a great experience.
The question was leading, so you did come back here because there is a huge value to what people do here, to put it very gently.
There is. But a question you haven't asked yet that I'm going to pose on your behalf is, Dawn, what about the aging of the entrepreneurial workforce?
Wonderful. Good question.
And,
excellent.
And that is a risk for us. 20 years ago or 30 years ago, the transition was from an entrepreneur to the next generation. It might be his children, maybe maybe he had a partner in the business, and she had children. Yes. But the transition, maybe there was a brother or a sister in the business, and so somewhere there was a next generation, children, nieces,
usually
nephews.
Erie has a long history of passing business.
That started to change because in the 90s, business owners started saying to their children, do what you want to do. I want to see you pursue your dreams and your goals. So what we found come the late 90s, early 2000s is owners who have children, but the children are not in the business. None of the children in the business. So now that transition began to mean selling it. And
boy, you're bringing up a real good topic.
Right.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I'm scared when I hear that, because now you hear the word conglomerate, people from the outside world that just buy things for entrepreneurial or venture capital purposes.
Private equity.
And then the local flavor to that business just.
Well, many of them, you'd need a few sheets of paper to keep track of the names of the companies that were bought and moved, or a larger company bought it to take some capacity off the market and just closed it down.
I never thought about that.
Yeah, there are industries
wow.
where there's excess capacity, and so if you've got a big checkbook, you can buy a company and just close it down and
you eliminate your competition.
No, that's not the majority of them.
No,
and so you have various things going on. You have a company outside the region that wants to vertically integrate, so they buy a company and they move it close. Or they need some additional capacity, they buy it and move it out. Or there's too much capacity, they buy it and close it. They want some intellectual property, so they buy it for the engineers and the the designers, the manufacturing expertise. So those things happen and have happened. So we started looking at that, 2006, 2007, and talking to some of our clients. And a lot of them said to us, I've been putting this off. I'm 68 and I'm still here because I don't know what to do. My children aren't in the business. I don't want to sell it to somebody and then have it move. And so we started asking the question, well, what if we took a kind of an engineered approach to the transaction? Meaning, what if we could go searching, do some homework, and find a buyer who ought to have a reason to want to leave it here. So instead of just putting it out there and advertising it and seeing who shows up, what if we kind of engineered the sale and said, okay, the buyer we're looking for is a buyer who needs manufacturing in this region because it's too expensive for them to ship it to Chicago and get it to Buffalo, Rochester, Harrisburg. So having manufacturing capability here would be a good thing for them. So why don't we look for those kind of buyers? Why don't we look for buyers who need a distribution area so they can ship their products from there to here, and then use this as a distribution center because it's a great region for distribution. We have 79, 90, 97. What if we find a buyer who's looking for a particular type of expertise, and that expertise, let's say it's engineering expertise, let's say it's information technology expertise, well, that's vested in people. And so if a buyer buys an intellectual property company like an engineering firm or an architecture firm, and then you say, okay, we're all going to Minnesota, you're going to lose those people. So that buyer, again, would buy the company, but they would leave it here because they don't want to lose that asset, those engineering skills. And that strategy has really, really worked well. I mean, I know every company that we've transacted since 2008, even the ones where the buyer was international, we've found a buyer who would leave the company here.
Let me ask you a little tougher question. You don't have to answer this. Where do you find these companies interested in Erie, Pennsylvania? And if you have another way of answering that, or you want to divert from that, is because it's part of your business acumen.
It's just classic market research.
Is that what it really is?
It's just classic market research.
Common sense.
Can I give you an example?
Please. I would really appreciate it.
Yeah. So we had an engineering firm, and I won't name the name of the firm, but we had an engineering firm, and they had large food companies as their main customer. So they were doing software systems to operate the equipment that produced the food, and they had a variety of people that business could have been marketed to, but one that they pointed out in particular was a manufacturer of the equipment itself. So if you went to a food manufacturing plant, you would see this company's equipment in that facility. Well, who's the better buyer than that company? They already their equipment's already being programmed by this engineering company, and their equipment is all over the United States. So what better buyer? And so that's generally the approach is to look for that buyer that has a vested interest in the company that you're trying to sell. And most of those buyers were not looking to buy. So they weren't. Now the example I just gave, they were looking to buy, and they could have chosen from a dozen engineering firms across the United States, but they liked the skills and talents of this engineering firm. And back to my earlier point, if they'd have said, we're going to move, just bought this engineering firm, we're going to move it to South Carolina, 50% of the staff wouldn't have gone. So that's a perfect example where that company had not only had a need for that engineering firm, but they had a need to see that engineering firm stay where it was because they needed to keep those resources. But the challenge today, and my good friend Tom Hoffman from the Knox firm put a name to the solution. It's called the family private equity model. What we're seeing today is companies where the owner is saying, I really don't want to sell it. I could, and hopefully we would find the right buyer, and hopefully they would keep it here. But I don't know what I would do with the money. If I sold it, would I put it in the stock market? Well, that's riskier than the business I already have.
Yeah.
Right? And he knows what he's making.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And he knows what the risk factor is.
He knows exactly all the things that you want to do to protect your money. That person knows, right? So, a few years ago, we had a client, and we were talking through, the perfect buyer and how would we find that buyer. And, like I said before, it's a matter of doing market research. Mm-hmm. Sort of reverse market research. We're not doing market research for a customer. We're doing market research for a buyer. And he said, if I was 30 years younger, I would be the perfect buyer. And so we said, well, why don't you in essence buy it again by keeping it? Why don't we find somebody to run it for you? Mm-hmm. So the business keeps your talents. It keeps your insights into the market. It keeps your insights into the product. It keeps your insights into the manufacturing processes. But we're going to make you the chairman of the board, and we'll hire a president. And so you help us figure out exactly the characteristics of the perfect person to run it, and we'll go find that person. And then now the business stays in Erie. You have an asset that you understand well, but you don't have to work 60 hours a week anymore. You can.
This is exciting because there are many great organizations, Gannon SBDC from there all the way to the government, the county, the city. Everyone's doing not entrepreneurial work, but they're doing business attraction as best possible. The universities, Black School of Business, all creating attractors. And I always thought, well, it really needs to be done from the bottom up. And this is a perfect example of finding the pieces.
And it's working
them together.
Yeah, it's working incredibly well.
And if I could add one thing real quick is that you need expertise to do that. I'm not saying that our universities and our governmental officials are not educated or smart enough to do this, but it seems to me you need some sweat equity, grassroots education. You need to be involved in these companies directly to get these things going.
You're absolutely right. So in the years since we started doing that, mm-hmm. In a typical year, I think this year alone, what is this, July?
Oh yeah, July. Getting into the end of 18 already. It's sneaking up on us.
I think we've done quickly. 4 already
this year,
where we've hired a president for somebody who didn't want to sell their business, but didn't want to work those hours anymore. And so we've done 4 in Northwest Pennsylvania,
This
year.
is marvelous news. I mean, emotionally, I feel this is very important.
It is. It's great, and that's and Tom came up with that term, the family private equity model, because what's happening is the individual is treating the business they own as though they were a private equity buyer.
And they're here. They're involved in community.
Absolutely.
Giving,
all the things that go with
activities.
Yeah, all the things that go with local ownership continue.
Yeah. And it preserves our community, our integrity.
Yeah, because even if we sell a business and it doesn't move, the new owner, their focus is on their community. So they're not going to invest in our community with their new entity the way they did before.
Sure.
But when an owner retains it and we put a president in place and that business stays here and continues to grow and it's interesting, a lot of them have seen an uptick in growth that when you look back at it, you say, well, I know why. The owner was getting tired, and they were getting conservative. And now you have a new president, and they're enthusiastic. They've got a lot of experience. So to your question about education, we find that they generally are well educated. We find that they're on the younger side. They're in their mid-30s, maybe. When you think of a president, you think of somebody in their 50s, but a lot of these folks are very well-trained professionals that, some of them have come out of GE. But all of them have put themselves on a high-growth career track. So by the time they're in their mid-30s to early 40s, they have a lot of that hands-on experience that you're talking about, combined with an education, combined with a love of business. So they're the perfect president.
And they're here.
And some of them are going to become owners. Yeah. So some of those folks, it's easy to look down the road 5 or 7 years, and that's happened to some extent already. 5 or 7 years, they'll be turning to the owner and saying, I'd like to buy this, and the owner's going to say, you earned it. I want to help you buy it. That's going to happen.
A couple minutes left. Where do you see our community going, especially in the area of expertise that you have?
Well, I'd like to answer the question maybe a little bit broader and say,
sure.
how could you not be optimistic when you see the number of fronts on which we're moving as a community? We have, among our political class, we have a number of politicians in leading positions who are or have been business owners, and I think that's a good thing. And if you look at Erie's history is full of high-performing politicians who've owned businesses. When you look at the number of initiatives that have been started, we read about them in the paper every day, but they don't compete with each other. They overlap but don't compete with each other. I mean, how could you be anything but enthusiastic?
Donald W. Moore, the man without a title, but with a huge mission and a wonderful vision. Thank you for sharing all this with us today.
Happy to be here.
It was really
Appreciate
good insight for me, and I'm sure our audience appreciated this as well.
I'm glad I could help.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.